Shoujo Tsubaki is an animated movie directed by Hiroshi Harada in the 1992, based off the manga by Suhiro Maruo, which was published in the 1984. Now, for this video, I have both read the manga and watched the movie, so I can safely say that they both are very similar. Aside from some slight differences in dialogue, the plot, the characters, the art style, it's all the same. There is also a live action version of the movie which I couldn't be bothered watching, and I don't think I need to explain why. But in this video, I want to focus more on the animated movie that was created by Hiroshi Harada. I initially found out about this when it started trending on TikTok around 2020 to early 2021. But at the time, it was being spread around like a chainmail as some cheap horror jump scare kind of thing, going on about how horrific and gory the movie is, and even going as far as warning people not to watch it. And as expected, when you tell someone not to watch something, they're going to go ahead and watch it. So it began trending. But today I want to take a deeper look into this movie, analyzing certain parts of it, because despite having the runtime of only 47 minutes, there is so much to unpack. It is so much more than just some cheap jump scare to shock you, which I think is a very superficial way of looking at it. Hiroshi Harada worked on this film for 5 years on his own because due to the taboo subject matter, people were reluctant to fund or collaborate with him on this project, which has attributed to the shorter runtime of the film. And to add even more insult to the injury, this movie was banned everywhere after its release, and the tapes and anything related to the film was destroyed. Harada since then has kept a low profile. It was difficult for me to find out much information about him, even after the research I had done for this video. In this video, I want to take a broader, more in-detailed look into this movie and analyze whether the backlash it received was justified or not. But before I get into that, let's talk about what this movie is even about. The movie Shoujo Tsubaki, or sometimes called Midori, is set in the 80s and follows the aesthetic of vintage animation, surrealism, and eroguro, which denotes things that are meant to be grotesque yet erotic at the same time. So think of things like furanari, tentacles, all that fun stuff. The full name is Chika Genko Gekika Shoujo Tsubaki, which roughly translates to Underground Projected Dramatic Pictures, The Camellia Girl. It originated during the early Showa era of Japan between 1926 to 1989 through Kamishibai, which is a form of storytelling with pictures. Generally speaking, Shoujo Tsubaki, or the Camellia Girl, follows a stock protagonist of an adolescent girl who, due to difficult circumstances at home, has resorted to selling flowers out on the streets to support her family, and then, due to some strange turn of events, ends up joining a circus. The movie has a prologue and 3 parts which are listed as songs, as opposed to say parts 1, 2, or 3, which I found interesting. The way I interpreted it is that songs have an ending. It is a short musical piece with some repetitions and certain parts that are enigmatic. In a way, I think it represents Midori's life in this circus, where she goes through most of her days being roughly the same, and we only get to see a glimpse of her overall being. In the prologue of the movie, 13-year-old Humidor, who goes by the name Midori, laments over her lack of sales in flowers one night when she encounters a mysterious man in a hat. Let me interject a bit and say that flowers play a key symbolism throughout this whole film. The name itself, Shoujo Tsubaki, or the Camellia Girl, camellia flowers symbolize love, adoration, affection, which I think are all these things that Midori longs for. In the opening scene of the movie, we see an ominous setting of dark, windy, stormy weather, then the dilapidated remains of the circus, followed by surreptitious music, which was juxtaposed with petals of cherry blossom floating in the air, which is typically associated with love and renewal and new beginning. I think being in this circus, it is a new beginning for Midori, but inverted, as in degradation rather than regeneration. It also tells us that this is the end of spring and the start of winter, and foreshadows the struggles Midori will have to face. But anyways, going back to Midori meeting the strange man in the hat, Midori vents to him about the lack of sales and opens up about the harsh conditions at home, that her father ran away and her mother is deadly ill and bedridden. The man comforts her by buying all of her flowers and gives her his card, assuring that she can come visit him whenever she needs anything. Upon returning home, Midori finds her mother dead with her corpse infested with rats. Aside from the graphic depiction of her mother literally being eaten by rats, which was actually shown, and I'm not going to show anything graphic in this video, so rest assured, what I found interesting was that their neighbors knew about her death. They knew that her corpse was infested with rats, yet no one bothered to do anything productive. Things like helping to get the body removed, arranging a funeral, preparing for burial, making sure Midori is okay. Instead, all they did was scatter some roses all over the body, in a way to almost hide the ugly that underneath the blankets her body is literally being eaten by rats as we speak, and yet feel good about doing something. So after finding her mother dead, hopeless and nowhere to go, Midori ends up going to the address that the man had given her and arrives at the fairground circus. There we are introduced to the other members of the circus. Tokuruji Mujitsu, who goes by the Mummy Man, is a young man with missing arms and face covered in bandages like a mummy. He is said to have suffered from leprosy, although in some adaptations he is said to be a burn victim. Akaza the Giant is the sword-swallowing, one-eyed strongman with a shaved head and tattoos. Benitsu the Snake Woman is a middle-aged, sadistic, promiscuous woman whose tricks often involve eating and swallowing snakes. Kanaban, who specializes in the fire-swallowing tricks, is later revealed to be intersex, as in despite presenting feminine, they were born with the male genitalia. They are often referred to as the boy-girl, so just throw in some casual transphobia. And then you have Honishi, who is referred to as the human pretzel due to him being deformed, and the human worm, who wasn't even given a name. As you can probably tell by the depictions of these characters, it was not so much a circus as it was a freak show. These characters were reduced down to not their personalities or unique character traits, but rather their physical appearance. It was about what they have rather than who they are as a person. In fact, outside of circus, there would be signs saying things like "Snake Woman, Backward Looking Man." The language used in the manga was a lot cruder, as it goes on to say, "See the dirtiest teeth in the world, oozing sights, slimy green snot, mounds of stinking earwax. Right before your eyes, marvels and monstrosities. Life, 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 a head full of pus. It's astounding, it's spellbinding, it's beyond your wildest dreams." For the extra curious and extra daring, a special performance in the back. See the half woman, half man. Watch a What a hairy night. Come gape at the man ape. The human worm will make you swarm. See society's outcasts, mankind's unwanted, the world's greatest curiosities. And then you have Midori, who is young, able-bodied, conventionally attractive. In any other situations, she would have been the furthest away from being left out, but in this instance, she is outcasted among a group of outcasts. I would also argue that there is a sense of envy that is projected by these characters onto Midori. As to them, Midori probably represents what normal is, something that they never had the luxury of experiencing themselves, which was further confirmed by Harada himself, whose inspiration for these characters came from a circus trip that he went to as a child, where he saw some people who were disabled and deformed for the first time.
私自身も体が弱いし病気がちなので、腸に潰瘍ができたりしたりとかいろいろな病気になったんですね。そうするとそれがやっぱり健康の面でそれがハンデになったり負い目になったりするので、そういう人たちをもうちょっと、そういう人たち、コンプレックスを持った人とか、世の中を恨んでる人とか、五体満足じゃない人間の方にやっぱりどうしても感情移入。
Afterwards, Midori was forced to join the circus by the fairgrounds people, where she was kept as a sex slave, doing all the dirty housework and occasionally being abused and assaulted. It's like after being some of the least powerful people in the society for so long, they finally felt a sense of power by torturing Midori and thus taking revenge on the society that dehumanized and marginalized them. Midori stopped going to school due to the traveling nature of the circus, and at nights she lays awake hopeless about her future and what will happen to her. Song 1, Patience and Submission. Song 1 starts off with Midori throwing off after being forced to bite off a live chicken's throat, to which circus members, Akaza and Benitsu in particular, say to her,
またかよ、しょうがねえな。
鶏の血ぐらいでビビってちゃこの商売務まんないよ。
We also find out about Mr. Urashi, aka the Man in the Hat. We find out that he is the owner of the circus and is a failed magician, as his tricks are flawed and are laughed at, which is what the smeared chicken's blood was used for. Throughout this song, we see a glimpse of Midori's life in the circus, consisting of not just physical and sexual abuse, but psychological abuse as well. All the circus members are incredibly sadistic and promiscuous, as Midori would often wake up in the middle of the night to the sounds of them mourning or having violent orgies together. Obviously, can't show any of that, but it wasn't just sex in the traditional sense, if you will. There were a lot of strange kinks and fetishes that they were into, like licking eyeballs, which was something Mr. Urashi was into as he did it to Kanaban, and Midori was forced to be subjected to all of that. Every time Midori gets a glimmer of hope in her bleak world, it gets snatched away. Like the time she found a litter of puppies that she fed and looked after for a brief period of time, Kanaban comes in and brutally kills them by stomping onto them and smashing their heads against the wall, then cooking them off in a stew, feeding them off to Midori without her knowing.
よく肉なんて買う金あったな。
買わないよ。犬の肉なんて売ってるわけないだろ。
犬？どうした緑？あんまりうまいんで泣き出したぜ。
There was this awful scene where Mujitsu bursts into Midori on a cold, snowy night, stomps onto her and rapes her, which was really disturbing to watch. On a side note, back when this movie was trending on TikTok, there were literal fandoms for each of these characters, shipping them all together. Especially for Mujitsu, there was a cult-like following where people were writing fan fictions, making edits of him, fetishizing his disability, which was so bizarre to watch. Especially if you had actually seen the movie, you would know that none of these people are good people. Mujitsu especially, there is an entire scene of him raping Midori. Despite that, I really can't see how or why people would still simp over him. It's like you can get away with pretty much anything if you're deemed to be attractive, even when your entire face is wrapped in bandages. But then again, it's TikTok. What did you really expect? Midori has this awful nightmare where she finds herself getting deformed with all the circus members laughing at her and Benitsu saying,
人間のままで幸せになろうなんて虫が良すぎるんだよ。
Turns out it was just a fever dream and Midori ends up resting for the rest of the day. Eventually the circus start to lose a lot of money. Mr. Arashi was unable to pay any of the members properly for 3 months in a row, so he arranges to bring in a new member from all the way to Tokyo in hopes to turn things around. This new member had a lot of buzz around them before their arrival, as their specialty was that they were a magician who practiced Western-style magic, which was seen as like a superior form of magic. As expected, Midori becomes the scapegoat for their misfortune of lacking customers and making less of a profit. She is completely powerless, like everyone's punching bag.
のせいなんだ。案外あの緑が貧乏神かもしれねえ。あいつが来てからうちの一座は落ち目だ。
Just like the prologue, Song 1 ends with Midori looking distant at the train, frantically waving for it to notice her. But of course it doesn't, it keeps moving forward, leaving her behind as all she can do is watch it move past her teary-eyed. 」 . 」 . 」 . 」 . 」 . 」 . 」 . 」 . 」 . 」 . 」 . 」 . 」 . 」 . 」 . 」 . 」 . 」 . 」 . 」 . 」 . 」 . 」 . 」 . 」
「
Song 2. A dwarf emerges from the dark. The magician in question is a dwarf named Wonder Masamitsu, whose specialty is the bottle trick, where he makes himself fit in a tiny bottle and yet be comfortable. Now, before I get more into Masamitsu, I do want to comment a bit on the color palette of this song. The colors are a lot brighter in this section of the film compared to its previous parts. Also, the title card for this song is in black on white as opposed to white on black as we saw in the prologue and the first song, and with the title A Dwarf Emerges from the Dark. All this combined, Masamitsu is presented as almost this light, as this glimmer of hope in this bleak, gloomy world, and we see it as he immediately forms a liking to Midori, who is easily impressed and manipulated into his tricks. Their relationship soon turns into romantic, as we're shown this montage of them doing things together, which is supposed to be cute, but it honestly kind of creeped me out because Masamitsu is like at least 3 times as old as Midori. There definitely was more than what meets the eye when it came to Masamitsu. Like, he's a magician, there was a certain enigma to him. The first thing I noticed about him was how his hair looks like devil's horns, which I don't know if it means anything, but I did find it interesting. The relationship between him and Midori honestly gives me creepy uncle vibes. Like, the whole relationship feels like a huge symbolism of an adult grooming a child, like there was such a huge power dynamic. But regardless of the questionable nature of their relationship, Midori finally gets some power by being on the good side of Masamitsu, who gets the show running and making profits. Midori becomes almost like an assistant to Masamitsu and feels seen as she steps on the stage with him, greets the audience with him, brings him the bottle for him to do the trick. While she is still under the shadow of Masamitsu, it's important to note that before Masamitsu came along, Midori was a nobody. She was seen and treated as invisible, being everyone's punching bag, so while it may still be somewhat problematic, to someone like Midori who has lost everything, is emotionally vulnerable, it is still a huge step up from her previous position. We also find out that there is a narrator for this movie who goes on to say that Masamitsu's bottle trick is simply an illusion, as he is not actually inside the bottle, but appears to be. His trick involves more of hypnosis that he puts his audience under and manipulates them to see what he wants them to see. With their first show being a success, Mr. Arashi literally starts kissing Masamitsu's ass, lapping him up, offering him tea, lighting up his cigar, calling him sensei. Aside from profits, I think there is a personal reason as to why he idealizes Masamitsu so much. As we saw in the first song, Mr. Arashi is a failed magician himself, and I think he almost views Masamitsu as like a role model, as someone he wishes to be. We also see an interesting shift of power happening, with other circus members being pushed to the side and getting kicked off the stage while Midori and Masamitsu are cheered on, almost like an inversion of power, causing some jealousy among the circus members. We get yet another montage of Midori and Masamitsu where they get married and have their pictures taken, which was quite a big deal back in the 80s. As time goes on, being under Masamitsu, Midori becomes more confident and empowered, as she even stands up for herself when tormented by circus members. Tells them off by saying, "I'll tell my husband," on the same tone as "I'll tell my mom," which clearly backfires as she is outnumbered and they're much bigger and stronger than Midori. But then Masamitsu steps in and puts them all under hypnosis and creates the illusion of Midori being a giant that is crushing everyone and everything as she lands after being tossed in the air. So we get a physical visual of the power shift as Midori literally becomes bigger and stronger than them, even if it's under illusion. After being dumbfounded by the hypnosis, Masamitsu allocates housework to circus members and tells Midori to just have some rest, go stroll around the town, take some money to buy something. But afterwards, something upset happens as we finally get to see Masamitsu's dark side unfold. He is revealed to be incredibly jealous and domineering over Midori. The first account we see it in is when Midori is chilling at the town, sitting on the steps, having some sweets, minding her business. Then she gets approached by Mujitsu, who apologizes to her about earlier and confesses his love for her, with Masamitsu just glaring at him from the corner. At this point, if you're wondering whether it is two grown men fighting over a 13-year-old girl, you would be correct. But let me remind you that this movie was set in the 80s, and also Japan's age of consent is 13. So, yeah. As Mujitsu walks away, he's killed in the most bizarre way I have ever seen in an anime. So after spotting the remains of a person's leg that was half eaten by ants, Mujitsu gets sucked up by quicksand, and when his body from only chest up sits above the ground, he sees an alternate version of him with arms offering him a hand. Obviously, Mujitsu couldn't take it, and he soon realizes that it was Masamitsu all along that has put him under hypnosis, thus creating an illusion of one of his deepest desires, which is to be able-bodied, have two arms, two legs. After being sucked into metaphorical quicksand, Masamitsu suffocates Mujitsu by stuffing his face with dirt, resulting in his death.
お前はろくでもないやつだ。死ね。お前なんかに緑ちゃんを渡さん。
Now, you can argue that there was an alternate motive to killing Mujitsu, as before that we see Mr. Arashi being exploitative and refusing to pay his workers properly despite making profits, to which Masamitsu steps in and says, "Leave it to me." Obviously, the less workers you have, the more you can afford to pay them well, but that, to me, doesn't really justify as to why Mujitsu deserved to die. I think him confessing his love to Midori might have been the straw that broke the back. Another instance when we see Masamitsu dominating over Midori is when a man allegedly from a well-known film studio from Japan comes in to visit her, offering her the starring role in their latest film. Obviously, this opportunity seems too good to be true. It definitely is a little bit suspicious to say the least, especially with him getting defensive after being called an imposter. But the way Masamitsu went about it, he just stepped in, snatched the business card off Midori's hand, and ripped it in a million pieces, and thus crushing her dreams simultaneously. He claimed it's because he cared about her and didn't want her going off with someone they didn't know very well, but really it seemed like he was possessive and did not want to lose power over her. Obviously, Midori was not very happy about that, as she laid in bed covered in blankets on the night of the show. When Masamitsu goes to check in on her, he finds that she picked up the ripped pieces of the business card and attempted to join them back together. Masamitsu lashes out on her and smashes her against a mirror, then trapping her in the bottle. Getting so angry right before stepping onto stage obviously affected his performance, as he struggles to concentrate and goes off at the audience. To make matters worse, this particular group of audience was quite unpleasant, as when they picked up on the fact that Masamitsu was struggling, they started laughing at him, booing him, calling him names, which aggravated him even further. Then what followed was perhaps the most graphic, disturbing scene of the entire movie. Masamitsu goes off at the entire audience by putting everyone around him under hypnosis and then creating the illusion of everyone getting deformed, changing shapes in the worst way possible, twisting and turning, swelling up and exploding, skin melting off, growing extra body parts. It's as gory as it gets. It was diabolical, as we're shown fire blazing, demons playing around. Then a title card appears saying that this form of magic is probably the most evil, darkest kind there is, originating from Central Asia. It came to Japan from China in the 8th century. After being prosecuted by the authorities, the magicians disappeared in the 18th century, implying that Masamitsu is one of the few magicians of this kind who still remains. Obviously, everyone was in tremendous pain during this spell, except for the already deformed circus members who were cheering them on.
何興奮したの久しぶりだよ元の体に戻ったんだからあのままだったらもっと良かったのに
It's like they finally felt the sweet revenge of seeing them in pain after being marginalized for so long. After the monstrosity of last night, Mr. Arashi suggests that they should move in order to avoid more trouble, even though their bodies changed back to normal after the hypnosis ended, to which Masamitsu refused and stated that he quit and handed his notice. Mr. Arashi begs him to stay as he has single-handedly been running this whole circus the entire time, but Masamitsu has made up his mind and finds Midori. He apologizes for lashing out at her earlier and asks her to move with him. But Midori refuses, saying that she is sick of moving around and would just want to go home. Final song, Under the Cherry Blossom.
1、2、3! さあ、まっすぐ奥へ歩いてごらん。
The final song starts off with Masamitsu hypnotizing Midori and putting her in an illusion where her deepest desires and wishes come true in order to manipulate her into staying with him. Midori has the simplest of desires as she just wants to be your typical girl, living a simple life and going back to school, which was implied as she often looked at schoolgirls with envy during her occasional trips to the town. In her illusion, we see an alternate world in which Midori's mother is well, her father is present, and she is even able to go to the school trip that was mentioned.
はいこれ何何って明日遠足だろ
As Midori goes to bed with her parents the night before the school trip, still spellbound under Masamitsu's hypnosis, he again asks her to move with him, to which Midori, still drunken under hypnosis, mumbles yes. Later we find out Mr. Arashi ran off with the money, leaving all the circus members behind. Kanaban, being the youngest member after Midori, becomes their scapegoat as they are blamed for this.
お前もボサッとしてるから置いてかれるんだよバカチクショー殺せ殺せチクショー
The circus members figure out what to do, then eventually deciding on going their own separate ways. Benitsu starts packing her things up and saying that she'll just find a partner to give her a float. Kaza claim to have gotten offers from other circuses. Kanaban is shown to cutting off their hair while crying, implying that they want to present themselves as masculine now, and thus showing the start of a transformation. And then Midori and Masamitsu comes in to say their goodbyes, Midori being transformed the most out of them all.
緑とっても可愛いよ
This was the time when things seem to have been going pretty well for Midori, as she walks with Masamitsu to the bus stop, linking arms together. Masamitsu asks her to wait while he picks up something to eat. Midori was still spellbound. She had to repeat to herself, "It's not a dream," over and over, as this is probably the best thing that has happened to her in this entire movie. But then things take a turn in the most absurd way possible. As Masamitsu returns to Midori, he gets stabbed and killed, which was so out of character for him because throughout this film he is presented as this ultra-powerful magician who can get you under control with one glare. For him to just die without even putting up a fight is probably the biggest twist I have ever seen in a movie. There are a couple theories as to what might have actually happened. But in my opinion, since this movie is heavy on the spiritual, supernatural trope with all the magic and everything, I think it is something on that realm, especially in the scene where Masamitsu kills Mujitsu, Before dying, his last words were,
こんな目くらましに何度も引っかかると思うな
So I do think it may be some sort of a karmic reaction where Masamitsu dies as helplessly as Mujitsu. But after Masamitsu's death, the spell he put Midori under breaks as she gets stuck in a loop, running in circles as tense music plays in the background. After running around for nearly the whole day and yet ending up at the same spot every time, Midori goes insane and the loop is broken as she sees the circus members, even Mujitsu and Masamitsu laughing at her. The cherry blossom petals start to fall even more aggressively, which I think refers to the opening scene of the movie. But this time around, there is almost a sinister vibe to the whole scene as the petals of cherry blossom looks like splatters of blood. Midori goes on to attack the illusionary circus members, and then the whole hypnosis finally ends, and she is left with nothing. Absolutely nothing. The final scene of Midori screaming was perhaps far more gut-wrenching than any graphic scenes that this movie had to offer. But what I think is even more heartbreaking is that things like this are actually happening in the real world as we speak. Japan has a long history of sexualizing schoolgirls with an entire business of selling them, where high school girls offer adult men services involving company to sexual intercourse in exchange of money. This is something I briefly touched on in my video on Junko Furuta, but Japan is one of the most, if not the most, regressive developed nations in terms of gender equality. Japan's rape laws remain the same as they were back in the 1970s, with a shorter minimum sentence for rape than it is for theft. Japan's age of consent is 13, like I mentioned, and currently Japan is ranked 128 out of 156 in terms of gender equality.
Part of the reason that you have this sort of Lolita culture in Japan is because the life and the opportunities for women are so bad. It's a hard thing to stop. This society is one of the most misogynist, sexist societies in a developed country in the world. I would not want to be a woman here.
Human trafficking is an ongoing thing that happens in Japan. According to US Department of State, Japan is classed Tier 2 in terms of meeting TVPS standards, meaning it doesn't fully comply with its minimum standards. But even then, the numbers could be a lot worse as many sexual violence victims do not report their assaults to authorities due to the taboo nature of the topic. And this may be a bit far-fetched, but the backlash Shoujo Tsubaki received reminds me a lot of the backlash Cuties received in the August of 2020. Cuties was a coming-of-age movie directed by Maimuna Dukure, which was absolutely obliterated when its poster, synopsis, and trailer were released to the public. While there were some directorial choices that is questionable, especially with Netflix stuffing up the poster and the synopsis to sexualize them even further. But beyond just the superficiality of children being sexualized, which is supposed to make you uncomfortable, it is revealing the dark underbelly of what many young girls go through as they hit puberty and reach adolescence.
I feel a deep connection to this movie because this was my experience. I was ummy. But when I watched this movie, this was the first time in my entire 29 years on this earth that I have watched a film that I was like, I see myself 100% in this character. I have never watched a film and been able to do that. Being able to see something like that in a mainstream sort of way, it just really meant a lot to me. It did a lot for me.
There were also some articles written by people who suffered sexual abuse as a child, who found cuties to be underwhelming and actually agreed with Dugray's views. At the time, I saw some critics wondering why Cuties had to be a movie. Why couldn't it be delivered via any other medium like a book or a documentary? Well, it's because fictional media has a way of pulling your heartstrings, unlike more analytical media like a documentary, which is less likely to get mainstream attention anyway. You are more likely to see yourself in a fictional character as opposed to something more real and analytical. But going back to Midori, while it's easy to criticize Harada, burning tapes, or even hating on the film, it takes away the attention from the fact that this is the reality many children in Japan, especially young girls, are forced to live in. It's easy to point fingers at creators like Maimouna Dugray or Hiroshi Harada than to examine the world that we live in where they felt the need to create such films in the first place. Because when you're pointing finger at someone, you're also simultaneously pointing it away from yourself. Hiroshi Harada has worked on this film by himself for 5 years as due to the taboo nature of the film, people were reluctant to fund or collaborate with him. He used up his life savings, 5,000 sheets of animation were hand-drawn, which is why certain parts of the film looks more like a slideshow. Regardless of what you think of the movie, his determination to get his art out despite all odds is something to be admired.
どこの会社もやっぱりお金を出すような内容ではないので、制作費を全部自分で調達しなく差別を助長するような目的で作ってるわけではないので、これをきっかけにそういういろいろな問題に対して若い人が気づいてくれたりとか考えてくれた方が嬉しい。
There are some speculations of Harada having suffered through sexual abuse and sex trafficking as a child himself, which has inspired him to create this movie. While I personally wasn't able to find much information supporting this, there is a segment where Harada talks about being bullied as a child, which we see a lot of in this film.
作る前の作品もやっぱりいじめをテーマにしてるんですけど、実際に小学校時代にいじめられた経験があるので、そのテーマを映画の中に盛り込むというのはかなり多いですね。で、盛り込んで忘れるというよりは、映画の中でそれを表現することによって今現在子どもたちが学校でいじめられてる子どもが多いと思うんですけど、その人たちに元気づけるような意味合いの方が強いんですね。
After being banned at its initial release, it was re-released after a few years and now it is a lot easier to find, but it still remains banned in Japan till this day. After it began to get more Western attention, especially after trending on TikTok, there were a lot more people who came forward with their stories who identified with this movie. One of them reads, "I wasn't even disturbed. I felt like I was watching a mirrored but darker version of my childhood. Sexual assault has been something I dealt with, and the fact that she was left alone to be broken sticked with me because that's how I ended up in the hospitals, in and out of psychiatric wards, not knowing how to stop and put an end, but eventually accepting the broken parts of me and somehow managing to drag along the small amounts of sanity I have left to live on." The point I'm trying to make with all this is that sometimes certain pieces of media is not going to appeal to the mainstream public, and that should be okay. I am absolutely not against censoring, I have done it in this video, but the more we censor, silence, and ban certain media that shed light on the more sensitive and taboo topics of the society, the more they remain as taboo, and acceptance becomes harder, which is key to healing. There is a quote by Banksy that goes, "Art should comfort the disturbed and disturb the comfortable," which is exactly what this movie had done. While so far I've only talked about the public outrage regarding this movie, I definitely think that there has to be some darker, more sinister motives by the authorities that has caused this movie to get banned, because the public themselves can't take anything down. They can create outrage, they can cause backlash, They can sign a change.org petition, but ultimately it is up to the corporations and the authorities and the people in power to listen to those demands and take actions, which rarely ever happens. Japan's sexual crimes is something that is difficult to research on because the appropriate information is really hard to find. With all the shame and taboo surrounding this topic, as well as the cryptic nature of Japan, as till this day it remains in denial about certain atrocities it committed throughout history, including the history of the rising sun flag, which was briefly shown in the film. Japan's response has always been to hide its ugly, to scatter roses over a corpse that is infested with rats, to shove it under a rug that this movie yanked forward by showing us how it really is, which is why I believe this movie remains banned in Japan till this day. So, I have presented my case, but now I'd like to know what you think. Is the ban justified?
いつか来た道いつまで